Hey y'all, Casey here. As I mentioned in my intro video, I'm a public defender, so I see the failings of our criminal justice system on an almost daily basis. That is not to say that it never works, but so often I see it doing more harm than good. I believe there is a better way. I believe restorative justice is that way. In the legal context, restorative justice is a process through which offenders and harmed parties come together in a facilitated proceeding to try to repair the harm done. Through this process, they try to restore the community to where it was before the harm was done, and possibly even improve the community. Since I'm most familiar with the adult criminal justice system, I am going to be focusing on restorative justice as it relates to adults in the criminal context. I will note, though, that restorative justice is used in other contexts as well, the most prominent of which being the school context. Here is my outline for how I think restorative justice should work in the adult context. A crime is committed, perpetrator gets arrested, perpetrator is charged with crime. Perpetrator is offered the chance to participate in restorative justice process. If the perpetrator wants to participate in the restorative justice process, they have to agree to take ownership of their harmful behavior. In Oregon, this would likely include a plea petition and an entry of conditional discharge. Some restorative justice programs do not require perpetrators to own their harmful behavior and instead give them an opportunity to own their harmful behavior. I do not think the process can be effective if the perpetrator doesn't start from a place of at least accepting that they have done harm. Some programs also require that perpetrators show remorse from the get-go. I do not believe that this is absolutely necessary, as hopefully that would be able to be achieved later on in the process. I just think that you need some amount of buy-in from both sides to get started. If the perpetrator did not want to participate in the restorative justice process, they could either take their case to trial or enter a guilty plea. There are a number of reasons why someone might not want to take part in the restorative process. They might be truly innocent, in which case they could prove that at trial, or they might want an easier way out in their eyes, like just doing some jail time. For those unfamiliar with the legal system, that last part might sound strange, but I see it all the time. I have tons of clients who would rather do jail time than participate in things like treatment in exchange for a dismissal. If the perpetrator opts to participate in the restorative justice process, then next, the harmed party will have to be asked if they would agree to participate in the restorative process. If they agree, great, the process continues. If they do not agree, they should not be forced to participate. Voluntariness is key to ensure buy-in. If the victim does not want to participate, the normal criminal proceedings would commence. If both the parties agree to participate, then each party is appointed an advocate to help each side tell their story. Both parties and their advocates meet with a judge who acts as a facilitator. First, the perpetrator would express their ownership of their harmful behavior to the harmed party and apologize. Next, the harmed party gets to tell their story. They get to express who they are, how they were harmed, and how that harm has impacted their life. This process helps perpetrators see how their actions impacted the individual harmed person instead of just the general principle of, you broke the law, so now you get punished. The perpetrator then tells back what they heard the harmed party say. The perpetrator then gets to tell their story. They also get to express who they are and any emotions they have felt as a result of the harm they have done. Each side telling their story helps to build context and humanize the parties. It makes the process personal instead of abstract. The perpetrator can express at this stage what they would have needed in that situation to have made a better choice and/or to not make the same choice in the future. The harmed party then gets to ask any lingering questions of the perpetrator that would help them heal. They then say what they feel they would need to be whole again. Advocates help the parties come to an agreement as to what the perpetrator would need to do to make things whole and restore the community. Once an agreement is reached, the parties enter into a contract and set a future date to review the progress of the contract. The parties can agree on remedial measures and include them in the contract in case the perpetrator does not comply with the contract. If the perpetrator does not comply with the contract and the remedial measures are exhausted, then the contract would be terminated and the perpetrator would proceed to sentencing, where the perpetrator could be punished to the full extent of the law, but their advocate would help them present mediation. Something that could also be built into this contract is an agreement that the perpetrator will acquire or seek out the thing they identified earlier that would help them avoid making the same bad decision. Their advocate can help them obtain the thing they are lacking. If the perpetrator does comply with the contract, then ultimately the case would be dismissed. There are so many benefits of the restorative justice system. I'm sure I'll miss some, but here is a list of a bunch of them. The restorative process helps the perpetrator understand how they harmed the community and how they are now making things whole. It gives a voice to harmed parties. In the criminal justice system, the harmed party, or as they are called there, the victim, has no real say in things. They might get to testify, depends on the state, but the prosecution does not represent them. That is not a dig at prosecutors, it's just a fact. In criminal justice proceedings, the state, the district attorney, represent the interests of the community at large, not the individual victim. To this point, frequently I have seen victims begging for the DA to agree to lift a no-contact order between the victim and the defendant, and the DAs object and insist that the order remain in place. I've seen victims say they want the case dropped, and the DAs ignore them. And these are not one-off occurrences. They are the norm. Again, though, this is not a dig at the DAs. I actually really like and respect a lot of the DAs I get to work with. This is a dig at the system. Restorative justice allows for healing between all parties involved. In some, if not most cases, in the criminal justice system, defendants and victims are not allowed to have contact. This prevents healing between the two parties and makes each side see the other as just that, an other. The questioning and storytelling process I outlined earlier allows for some closure instead of just a traumatic event happening and then never getting to address it. Restorative justice restores a community instead of just punishing a perpetrator and causing more harm. I think this system is particularly advantageous for small towns, where folks actually know each other and where harm done to the community is even more impactful. It also gives small towns the chance to navigate problems in ways that affirm their cultural values, instead of shoving big city values down their necks. We can't keep trying to legislate our way out of the problems of our communities. Different jurisdictions have tried so many ways of passing laws to address crime, but more laws, more government, is not the answer. I'm from the government and I'm here to help is not the answer to our problems. It's time for the government to be a little less intrusive. It's time for communities to control the conversation of the harm done to them, and time for the government to sit down and listen. There are many different ways for restorative justice to be instituted, but given the framework I've laid out, these are the parties I believe that should be involved in the process, and a little bit about what I think their role should be. Perpetrator and harmed party are pretty self-explanatory. They should be the focus of the entire process. The judge acts as a facilitator and maintains productive communications between parties. The perpetrator's advocate is either a retained attorney or a public defender. They help the perpetrator tell their story, navigate the contract forming process, act as a resource for helping the perpetrator fulfill their contract, and, should the perpetrator fail, they would advocate for the perpetrator in the sentencing hearing. The harmed party's advocate would be an attorney from the DA's office. They would, in this system, represent the harmed party. Similar to the perpetrator's advocate, the DA would help the harmed party tell their story, They would help the harmed party navigate the contract-forming process and, if the perpetrator should fail, would argue against the perpetrator's advocate in a sentencing hearing. Restorative justice is not some pie-in-the-sky, bleeding-heart liberal idea. It is a real thing that is being used in places all over the world. In North America, some American Indian tribes and some First Nation tribes in Canada have been using the process for quite some time. Some school districts in the U.S. have made use of this system. Longmont, Colorado makes use of restorative justice, both in the juvenile and adult criminal context, and it is used all over England. That is not an exhaustive list, but rather a few examples of where restorative justice is currently in action. Unfortunately, I was not able to find all that many critiques of restorative justice when I was doing my research, but critiques that have come up when I talk to people about restorative justice include: if second chances were available, then bad people would take them, and this system sounds too perpetrator-friendly. It sounds like the perpetrator will be treated like they are a victim. In response to the first critique, I think that second chances are integral to human society. We all make mistakes, and none of us should be defined by our worst mistake. If we label and denigrate people in this way, the chances that they will harm again are very high. If you do not allow people to become better, to earn their way back into the good category, then all of society suffers. I do not believe in giving someone 100 chances, but if you want society to be better and crime to go down, you have to give people a chance at redemption. In response to the second critique, I actually agree that some restorative justice programs are too perpetrator-friendly. I tried to take that into consideration when outlining a system that I think would work. The perpetrator very likely will need to acquire something to change their behavior, whether that's a job, housing, drug treatment, etc. But that should not cause the process to shift away from the fact that the perpetrator caused harm and needs to fix it. They are not the victim here. That is not the only critique I agree with. I've actually got quite a few issues with the way some restorative justice systems operate. Some practices operate under the philosophy that both parties contributed to the conflict, and this just isn't true in a lot of cases. I have had clients who just walk up to a stranger on the street and sock them right in the face. It's usually because the defendant was high on meth or having a mental health crisis, or both. In these types of cases, the harmed party did not contribute to the conflict. To me, practices that frame both parties as contributors in all cases are biased towards defendants. There is a belief, both by critics and supporters of restorative justice, that restorative justice is intended to be a complete replacement of our current system. That is not the case, or at least, I do not think that should be the case. That is why, in my outline of how I think restorative justice should work, I included moments where the case could end up back in the criminal justice system. You will still need a mechanism for people who are truly innocent to fight their cases. You will still have people who do not want to partake in the restorative justice process or who fail out of it. Restorative justice should be another tool in our toolbox for helping keep our communities safe. It should not be the only tool. In doing my research for this video, I saw a lot of sources that were really disingenuous about restorative justice and essentially were propaganda. If you don't start from an honest place, you make it too easy to be torn down and you alienate people, some of whom might have been potential supporters. The false juxtaposition between restorative justice and the criminal justice system that I just mentioned is one such example of dishonesty. Another one is treating restorative justice as a magic cure-all. It won't work in every situation, and that needs to be acknowledged. I've also seen people cast an overly negative picture of the criminal justice system to make restorative justice seem even better. Restorative justice doesn't need your straw man arguments. It's strong enough to stand on its own merits. One such example was a video that said the criminal justice system is about what rule was broken, who broke that rule, and how do we punish them. The actual philosophy behind the criminal justice system is what law was broken, who broke what law, and how do we prevent this from happening again. I recognize that, in practice, there are plenty of jurisdictions that delight in punishing who they view as the bad guys. But saying that is how the entire criminal justice system always works just serves to alienate people who think that defendants need to be held accountable. This does not have to be and should not be a partisan issue, but framing things dishonestly will make it one. Another dishonest thing I hear a lot is that the criminal justice system doesn't work, and then, to prove that, they point to the high rates of recidivism. It is true that, to some extent, the criminal justice system does not work. However, the high recidivism rates are not entirely due to the criminal justice system not working, but rather they are due to the fact that insufficient resources are made available to change behavior. If you go to prison because you stole a car to sleep in, a super common problem in Portland, but no subsidized housing is made available to you, you are probably going to steal another car to sleep in. I am, to a large extent, a pull yourself up by your own bootstraps kind of gal. If resources are available to you and you don't make use of them, that's on you. If those resources are not available, however, then, in a lot of cases, not much is going to change. You can say all you want that people should just pull themselves together and do better, which would be great. I would love it if people would do that. But the reality is that lots of people won't. And those people are going to keep costing the rest of us tons of money in the form of damages to the community, unpaid medical bills, and taxes for additional prisons and police officers. The economic solution is to address the root problem and provide that basic resource to people. That is all to say, it's not all the criminal justice system's fault, but rather, it is our fault for not investing in our communities. Restorative justice should be used more widely because it gets better outcomes while doing less harm. It is not a cure-all magical system. If we do not invest in our communities, restorative justice alone will not magically fix everything. Restorative justice is not a magical replacement for the criminal justice system. You will still have career criminals. You are still going to have people who are 100% innocent and will need to fight their case, or people who refuse to take accountability, so the criminal justice system will continue to exist. Restorative justice is another tool that should be made widely available to help repair harm and take some of the burden off of the criminal justice system. I'm open to hearing people's thoughts about all of this, so please leave your thoughts and suggestions in the comments. I know there are tons of approaches to this stuff, and even my own views are always evolving. Thanks for watching. Until next time.